Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, the weekly news show that might be broadcasting live successfully today, having perhaps overcome the technical difficulties and or NSA or Unit 8200, or was that 8600, this top secret one, problems that have been inflicted on us lately. But we think we've got them solved, inshallah. And hey, we've got our regular co-commentator, Helen Bajniewski, with us this week. Welcome back, Helen.
Good to be here.
All right, so let's talk about, well, first let's give our obligatory disclaimer. If conspiracy theories scare you, maybe you should be turning the channel to watch a different YouTube, because our show, False Flag Weekly News, does critique the mainstream media view of things, and naturally this disturbing information could give some people heart attacks, so those people should definitely take their medication and close their laptops right now, or turn off your phone or whatever you do to make sure that you're not exposed to disturbing information. But if you are interested in critiquing the mainstream media, please do join our email list so we can tell you when we will be broadcasting, and you can catch our live broadcast, as some people, I think, are perhaps catching it right at this moment. Just email ffwn@nolizeradio.org, put join in the subject line. All right, let's get going with the conspiracy theories. Helen, what did you think of this Christian Science Monitor article rehashing the mainstream attack on conspiracy theories, saying that all of these terrible conspiracy theories that are taking over the world and getting worse and worse all the time are based on things like, all of the polarization, it's all Trump's fault, or those conspiracy theorists have, quote, the desire to impose a narrative on events people find inexplicable and threatening. Wait a minute, who's imposing the calming, reassuring narrative on events that are threatening and sometimes hard to explain? Is it us, or is it the people taking the mainstream media blue pills? What do you think, Helen?
This is what they always do. It's projection nonstop. They're imposing a calming narrative saying, oh, this stuff is all random. I mean, I call them coincidence theorists. That's what it really should be, because it's more likely. I mean, they try to say that, oh, conspiracy theories have been around since the beginning of our nation and blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, that's because conspiracies have been around since the beginning of our nation. And this idea that this is a new thing, or they're trying to subconsciously demonize it by calling it conspiracism because it has the word racism in it. And nobody likes racism. Right? So conspiracism, and it's like, conspiracies are real. Calling them conspiracies doesn't, it's a known thing that powerful people are together in rooms. There are meetings all the time. This is absurd. The fact that they continually try to do this. And also I found a statistic in there interesting. They're trying to say that only 19% of the people believe that 9/11 the government was involved in the commission of 9/11. And that's not actually the case. So there's a much larger number. It's in your article, which we're going to look at later, you point that out. So I don't know, that they're just making stuff up at this point. And yeah, the calming narrative is on their side. Oh, it's all random. It's like the modern version of Calvinism. Oh, it's all random, predestined. There's nothing you could do about it because it's just going to happen anyway. So why don't you just, sit by and get screwed?
Right. Well, if you actually look at it, it's not so much, I don't think they're really telling us that it's random. Actually, their narrative is more all-embracing and explanatory. And our narrative does take account of the chaos, which includes lots and lots of people acting for their own interests and conspiring to do so, especially in high positions of power. And let's compare some of the narratives. Okay, the standard narrative of the dastardly Japanese surprise attack at Pearl Harbor by our enemies, and we fought the good war, that's all explanatory, and that makes people feel good, right? Whereas all of the chaos of what really happened in World War II, including FDR conspiring to have thousands of sailors killed in that Japanese attack that he and his 8-point plan produced, that's pretty disturbing and pretty chaotic. So take the blue pill, believe the official version of the nasty Japanese. Or let's look at the commie lone nut, Lee Harvey Oswald, shooting the president. Okay, I suppose that's sort of random, but it's also very reassuring. It's just a lone nut. And likewise with pretty much all of these other ones, the Palestinian lone nut who shot his brother, or the evil radical Muslims who blew up 3 buildings with 2 planes. Those are really the narratives that explain the chaos. And when we get into the nuts and bolts and the details of what really happened, that's what they don't want, because that's disturbing and chaotic.
Well, yeah, nobody wants to think that all of the important decisions are being made behind closed doors with no access to them. For some reason, Americans are stuck on this idea of democracy when we haven't had a democracy for our entire history. It's always been a republic for one thing, and it's not even a republic anymore. It's a, I don't know what you would call it, an oligarchy, a kleptocracy, something like that. But yeah, this idea that we have no powerful people conspiring behind closed doors is just absurd. Why else would they have these multiple levels of intelligence agencies working in complete secrecy? If it was all, you know, honest, just, you know, everything happens exactly as the media portrays it to happen. What would be the point of things like the CIA or the FBI or anything else that has classified material? It would be a little silly. Of course, nobody
Yeah,
wants to believe that a beloved American president would actually allow thousands of Americans to die, but it's called facts.
yeah, and I mean, let's take one case in point, the Jeffrey Epstein case. Now, who would actually believe that this guy who was so threatening to so many extremely powerful people could somehow actually be murdered in prison, even though we now know that all of these injuries to his body, this is all according to the official autopsy, and maybe it was him, maybe it wasn't, probably was, I suppose, I don't know, they haven't proved it with any DNA evidence made public. In any case, these injuries are consistent with strangulation, not with hanging. And yet the official story is that he hanged himself just at the moment that the prison security system happened to experience a total breakdown in procedure. All the guards fell asleep for no reason, and all the security cameras just blinked off and started malfunctioning at that moment. Now, you can be a coincidence theorist, I suppose, and say, oh, yeah, it's a suicide, nothing else, move on here. But even Fox News is not buying that. I don't think anybody's buying that. What do you think, Ellen?
Nobody is buying that. I mean, even their own polls suggest that like 50 think that it was a murder or something foul happened. Then there's like 17% who don't know. I forget the exact number, but the amount who think that he actually killed himself is less than a third of the population. So, and I would consider that some of that number is lying because they don't want to be seen as conspiracy theorists, because our society has done a very good job of demonizing conspiracy theorists. See article number 1. And nobody wants to be ostracized from a social circle. So yeah, the fact that this guy is even coming out and saying that he did not kill himself is, I find that pretty interesting though, because this guy's been linked to some pretty high profile investigations. I mean, things like the JFK assassination and OJ Simpson and all this other stuff. So I mean, there's definitely an agenda here. I'm not sure exactly what it is. And maybe they just realize they can't quite shove this one down our throats. It's too ridiculous even for the American population. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I don't think they're really trying to hide the fact that these so-called conspiracies are happening all the time, all around us. But if they just keep bombarding us with enough chaotic information, then it all kind of gets lost in the chaos. So with the Epstein thing, that he spent 20 years gathering this kind of pedophile video and photos on all these powerful people working for probably at least 2 or more intelligence agencies, got away with it for 20 years. I mean, how could anybody think the world works the way the blue pill pushers say it works with even cursory knowledge of the Epstein case? I don't know. But here we are at False Flag Weekly News pointing this out. And it's nice to have Fox News on our side for once. Well, it's nice having people on your side. How about Tulsi Gabbard, who's actually fairly popular at Fox News, but nowhere else? This week, she demanded that the U.S. end aid to Saudi Arabia and talked about the Saudis being behind the quote-unquote 9/11 terrorist hijackers, which is a half-truth at best, but it is a kind of a dangerous half-truth because you yank on that false thread and other things start to unravel. Helen, do you think Tulsi... does she know the full, and is she totally hip to 9/11, or is she doing this for other reasons?
It's difficult to tell. I mean, there are flashes of authenticity there, but then you see the photos of her with Miriam Adelson and Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, and you wonder, like, who is she exactly working for? Because obviously you pull the Saudi thread, you get the Israel sweater unraveling. And I don't think that she's necessarily prepared to go in on that. Now, they did recently have an article where Shmuley there, who gave her the award, is wondering, how did she suddenly turn against Israel? So it's like they're trying to make this authentic, that she's turned against Israel or whatever. And I do tend to wonder. I mean, she's definitely, of all of the Democratic candidates, she's the least worst of them. And I like to think that she's on the same page as the forces of good and truth and all that. But she is a politician, and one has been disappointed before. I mean, Bernie Sanders was seen as the savior of the party in 2016. Of course, he rolled over and played dead immediately. Tulsi, I like that she's going against Hillary. I like that she's actually standing up for herself. But I don't think that we should get our hopes up necessarily. I mean, pray for the best, but expect the worst, basically.
Well, I think she's right that Hillary has a lot of chutzpah to call Tulsi a traitor, when Hillary, like so many others, has gone along with this treasonous mass murder of Americans on 9/11. And we should point out here, by the way, that this business of the Saudi intelligence guys babysitting the hijackers, well, number one, they weren't actual hijackers. None of them were on the planes.
And Israeli intelligence guys babysitting the hijackers.
Yeah, and who was babysitting the hijackers? It was Omar al-Bayoumi. And I interviewed his nephew, Ehab al-Bayoumi, on my radio show. And he said the whole family knows that Omar was working for Western intelligence. He was babysitting them not for the Saudis, but for U.S. and Israeli and their friends in British intelligence. So let's pull on that thread and see if it unravels. And of course, Tulsi and a lot of other people, more than 19% of Americans, do not believe the official story of 9/11. How about the Larry Silverstein connection? There's another connection to 9/11. I don't think we're going to hear Tulsi mentioned real soon. Larry Silverstein wants to build more skyscrapers where he blew up old ones. That's right. Building 5 is going up now, where the Deutsche Bank building used to be. Now, the Deutsche Bank building across the street from the towers was showered with tiny human bone fragments on 9/11. They were discovered during the takedown of that building, and now they want to put up a new skyscraper, Building 5. Larry Silverstein really made out on 9/11. He ended up with total control of the entire Trade Center complex. He got it for a bargain, and he collected almost $5 billion in insurance money on his 1.5-month investment in the Trade Center. And he even confessed to demolishing Building 7 on national television and got away with it and walked away with $750 million in insurance money on the very building, Building 7, that he said that he was in on the decision to demolish. And then when he went to court, he said, no, it was the terrorist hijackers who hit the other buildings, and somehow that caused Building 7 to commit suicide. So this is the kind of stuff I don't expect to hear from Tulsi Gabbard anytime soon. What do you think, Ellen?
Yeah, I don't see her going after this. I mean, you can't run for president, unfortunately, and be critical of any of the Zionist project, including those parts that were complicit in 9/11. I'm sorry, when I said Israeli intelligence before, I meant the Mossad agents who were babysitting the hijackers, not the Saudi agents who were babysitting the hijackers. There were so many people babysitting the hijackers that it's really impossible to believe anything like, oh, this spontaneously happened and nobody knew about it. Duh. No, Tulsi's not going to go after Larry Silverstein. Could buy and sell her millions of times over, and did when he sent her and her contingent of the military to Iraq. So,
well, you know, Helen, that the most taboo conspiracy theories are the ones that involve the state of Israel. We've already mentioned a few. How about this kerfluffle over Charlie Kirk? You know, I hadn't even heard of Charlie Kirk until this week. Apparently, he's some young guy who, like at age 18, he convinced a bunch of Zionist billionaires to give him money to create an AstroTurf Young Conservatives group. And he looks like a complete airhead. And here he is attacking the USS Liberty survivors for pushing that conspiracy theory that they were attacked by Israelis deliberately, which of course they were. This is a great letter from Joe Meters, who's USS Liberty Veterans Association spokesperson. People should go and read this letter. I thought it was very eloquent.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk is an idiot, and he's one of these young wave of like ultra-Zionist, supposedly conservatives, but I don't think there's anything particularly conservative about putting Israel first, and America can just go sit on a pin or something. The next one is even funnier, but the fact that there are actually people coming to his events and interfering in his ability to pull the wool over young people's eyes is very important, and I cheer these people on wholeheartedly.
Yeah, well, that's the next slide. The next slide is this great video of this guy in the MAGA hat asking Charlie Kirk about what great dancers Israelis are. Did you dance with any Israelis when you were in Israel? Weren't they great dancers? And Charlie's like eating it up at first until he sees where it's going, which is Google dancing Israelis. It's pretty humorous. This is worthy of Jeremy Roth-Kushel.
Yeah, that was hilarious. And yeah, more people need to be doing that at this guy's events. Just make it so that he can't like spread his BS message on college campuses anymore, because, you know, I have my disagreements with conservatives, but this is not conservatism. This is Zionism in sheep's clothing, basically.
And all you have to do is go to his Wikipedia page and you see all of these people that gave him vast piles of money to do this incredibly stupid thing that he's doing. It's hard to believe that there's actually an audience for people like him, but I guess, you know, people's idiocy can never really be overestimated.
No, it's the problem is that he's on college campuses, and the fact that social justice warriors, quote unquote, have taken over college campuses. So he presents himself as the alternative, which obviously people want an alternative, because these people running around saying, oh, you can't wear a Halloween costume, that's cultural appropriation or something. These people drive
cultural appropriation from the Wiccans, right?
Yeah, they drive the college kids into the arms of people like Charlie Kirk. So the fact that like these people are exposing Charlie Kirk as the utter shill that he is very, very good, and needs to happen more.
Cool. Okay, well, now I know who Charlie Kirk is, and maybe I'll go see him and ask him some questions if he comes around to a campus near me. Well, let's move on to the big story of the week. The the alleged umpteenth killing of Baghdadi, the supervillain who headed ISIS. He became the world's leading supervillain since bin Laden was re-killed and fed to the fishes according to Islamic burial custom. And now they're breaking out exactly the same story, except it's even more farcical than the bin Laden raid story, which has been totally debunked by everybody from Seymour Hersh on down. And now Baghdadi, this story that he's whimpering and screaming and crying for his life. He died like a dog. Donald Trump is ranting about this. And is anybody eating this up? I mean, I would think I was almost rolling on the floor laughing when I heard this stuff. It's just so insane. They won't release any video footage of this raid, just like the bin Laden Abbottabad alleged raid. They won't release any photos of his body, just like with bin Laden. That would pose a national security risk. Well, I'm sure the truth about these things would pose a national security risk because they're lying through their teeth. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they did release like a few seconds of video supposedly from the raid that didn't really show anything. All it showed was like a compound and like nothing actually happening. And then the ruins of a compound, nothing actually happening. But yeah, this is a joke. And the fact that even the mainstream media is saying, hey, you know, didn't they kill him like 4 times? Well, maybe not the mainstream media, but the second tier level media, not the alternative media, but like the sub-mainstream media, is reminding people that, you know, he's died before, and actually several times before. I mean, my first reaction, I was out at a show and I looked on my Twitter and it said that he died. And so it's, oh, he died for the 4th time, or was it the 5th time? Or it's ridiculous. They keep killing people, and every time they need support.
Mm-hmm. It makes you wonder why they felt, you know, the official version of why we threw him in the ocean according to non-existent Islamic burial custom. And by the way, Islamic burial custom is to bury the person in dry ground as quickly as possible. You don't throw them in the ocean. But anyway, they have to make up that ridiculous story, they say, because if they buried him in the dry ground, then Muslims, who are the most anti-idolatry people on earth and who never go to worship tombstones, would go and worship his tombstone. Okay, well, if that were the case, why wouldn't they just put up tombstones everywhere where he supposedly died? And that would really confuse those crazy Muslims. I mean, this stuff is I mean, who writes this stuff? It's a theatrical farce.
Bad. It's pretty bad because, like, yeah, everybody debunked that after the bin Laden thing, saying that there is no like Islamic burial at sea. That doesn't happen unless the person is actually at sea and they can't get to land. So, and you would think that having a tombstone where people would rush to worship at would be a perfect thing for the U.S. because then they could just drone all the people that were gathered at the tombstone, kill all the terrorists. I mean, wouldn't that be a good thing? No, of course not, because he's one of their guys, and yeah, he's probably. If he wasn't dead already, then he's probably hiding out somewhere in Tel Aviv, sipping martinis.
Well, that's one of the theories, that he's an Israeli named Simon Elliott. That's one of the stories out there. Who knows whether that's the case or not? The other version, the official version, is that he created ISIS at Camp Bucca while he was a prisoner guarded by Americans in Iraq. That's the official version. The official version is that he had the run of Camp Buckow while during the year he was there, and he organized ISIS there. Well, maybe that's true, but somehow I think that if that were the case, he probably got some help organizing ISIS. I suppose one might say that his handlers were working for John Negroponte, the death squad expert, and they wanted to create a Sunni death squad to go after the Shia who were rising in Iraq. We know they did that elsewhere, and maybe ISIS was a death squad gone wrong. More likely, I think it was a death squad gone right, that Negroponte and his friends created Baghdadi and ISIS out of whole cloth. Whether or not Baghdadi is Simon Elliott, he's obviously created and working for the Americans, the Israelis, and the Saudis.
Yeah, I don't know if he's Simon Elliott or not. I haven't really seen any proof for that theory, but he's definitely, I mean, the whole thing about Israel treating ISIS fighters at their hospitals and stuff. It's like, this is, and of course, Rita Katz, who's the first one to get the ISIS videos out to everyone, she's their PR person, she's Israeli. So it's a bit ridiculous to think that, he was in our prison and he created ISIS there, and then somehow they got out, and we don't really know how that happened. No, it was extracurricular activity at terrorist training school, and he probably approached the CIA guys and say, hey, I have this great idea for a death squad. Oh, we were thinking of that too. You can be the leader. Great. Austere religious scholar. Yeah, Washington Post, his obituary was a laugh and a half, but I don't think that's one of our articles.
Now, that WikiLeaks document about how the Americans were yearning for a, quote, Salafist principality in Iraq and Syria, in other words, ISIS, before ISIS was there, is kind of a smoking gun. Maybe that's why they hate Assange so much. I don't know. The Russian,
the answer to their prayers. I mean, they prayed really, really hard, and then they got their Salafist principality. Oh wow, yeah.
What a coincidence. We wanted that Salafist principality, and then ISIS showed up, and there they were. Well, according to Gordon Duff over at Veterans Today, and I know, Helen, you've questioned his bona fides a few times. We have him on the show commenting occasionally, and there are a couple of things in this article I would like to ask him about that sounded kind of weird, but overall, I think the thrust of this article, like the thrust of Gordon's work, is pretty much accurate. And here he's quoting an anonymous Russian that Baghdadi is alive, healthy, and working with the U.S. in Iraq. The official word from the Russian Defense Ministry has from the get-go been questioning whether Baghdadi would ever have even been in Idlib with his mortal enemies of Nusra, and that's where he was supposedly killed. So I don't know. You have to. Do you accept the word of Veterans Today's Russian sources that Baghdadi is alive and well and still working with the U.S. in Iraq? I think you just have to, since I haven't talked to those Russian sources, I'll just say it's not that implausible. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, that part isn't particularly implausible. I mean, I question whether there actually are Russian sources that he talked to or whether this is all made up, but it's in line with what is reality, which is that this guy seems to have 9 lives and will always conveniently pop up whenever. I mean, if he wasn't killed in this last raid, it's going to be a great blackmail thing to be used against Trump, because if he starts getting out of line by saying, hey, let's really withdraw from Syria this time, instead of just, occupying the oil fields and making sure that the Syrians can't get at it, then they can always just whip out Baghdadi again and say, whoops, he lied. So if Trump did declare him dead without actually, having proof of his death, then that's going to be a problem, because if he does try to do anything that isn't utterly in line with the neocon Zionist perspective, then he's going to be screwed. There were a couple of things in this article that raised my eyebrows, but it's the standard Gordon Duff. I mean, there's truth in there and there's lies in there, and hopefully you can pick out which is which.
What do you think about his pointing out that the withdrawal from Syria is fake, that those troops that crossed into Iraq are right back in Syria now? And he's blaming Trump for that. You sound like you think Trump is being flummoxed by his advisors.
Yeah, well, Trump unfortunately has surrounded himself with enemies. I mean, if he was true about during his election trying to get the U.S. out of the Middle East, then he's shot himself in the foot by surrounding himself with neocons. And what I heard was that when he was trying to pull out of Syria, Lindsey Graham and some Fox News general, of course, the entire population of Fox News is all like national security state, but sat him down and showed him a map and like, oh, here's all the oil. And so he decided, instead of actually withdrawing troops from Syria, to get them all guarding the oil. instead. So it's like, if he really wanted to pull out of Syria, which is questionable, I mean, it's possible he just lied on the campaign trail like any other politician. But yeah, no, Gordon is correct that there is no withdrawal from Syria. That's a joke.
And I think he's also right about the oil theft from Iraq being a huge issue. And that should be the leading issue of the protests in Iraq. The fact that it's not makes me wonder about those protests, but we'll get to that story later. Next story is the Newsweek story saying that, well, Baghdadi may be dead, but the next supervillain will rise from his ashes. And this next supervillain is Abdullah Kardash, aka Haji Abdullah al-Afari, who's a former Iraqi military officer under Saddam. And get this quote from Newsweek's favorite expert, a regional official: "They will hit Syria, the chaos of Iraq, Europe, and definitely the United States. You have a sleeping giant," that's ISIS, a sleeping giant. "It will wake up and cause unforeseeable chaos and wreak havoc on the Western civilians." The deep state tells you that, you better watch out. But I don't know if it's crazy Muslims from the Middle East who are the ones who are going to organize all the havoc.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, they don't have the capabilities. ISIS is a bunch of like wind-up dolls from Camp Bukka and from other U.S. supervised facilities. No, it's just funny because like the guy's name is Kardash, so everyone's saying, "Oh, it's ISIS is led by the Kardashians," but yeah, it's basically that level of joke.
Maybe it is all a deep state in joke. Well, I read this kind of purple prose out of Newsweek, and I really wonder where these people get off telling us that the mainstream media is the sober, responsible fact-checking crew. I don't think so. Anyway, this was all very sensitive. Like you said, Helen, some of the sort of second-tier, pretty popular alternative and semi-alternative media was questioning the Baghdadi killing, saying, didn't they kill this guy many times earlier? And True News, which is a kind of red-pilled Christian conservative Christian outfit, it's pretty good. Got temporarily deplatformed from YouTube, apparently for questioning the assassination of Baghdadi. So I'm wondering if they're going to do that to us.
I don't know. I mean, I like True News, actually. I mean, not usually a fan of like the Born Again crew, but those guys are pretty good. And yeah, I don't know if they got deplatformed for that or something else. They said that they had a nice mashup, I think, in that video of comparing Trump declaring Baghdadi's death to Obama declaring bin Laden's death. And I mean, it matches up pretty well. I always say that Obama was Bush in a black dude suit, and Trump is not quite Obama in a white dude suit, because if he was, we'd be at war with Iran. But there's some similarities there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Obama raid on bin Laden in Abbottabad happened just a couple of days after Obama's birth certificate was released, and a lot of technical experts were saying that it was blatantly, massively photoshopped. They weren't even trying to hide it. In fact, they were trying to advertise it. And then 2 days later, that was wiped out of even the alternative news by the supposed killing of bin Laden. And Trump was the big birther conspiracy theorist who was talking about that back then. And now here he is doing exactly the same thing, having this story of the supervillain being killed used for his own political advantage. So I don't know about Trump. I mean, maybe he has America First isolationist instincts, but I don't see him as being really significantly different from his predecessors. So who benefits from all of this stuff is the ultimate question. Let's move on to the question of who's benefiting from more Mideast chaos, the violent protests in Iraq. They say they're protesting against economic stagnation and corruption. But when the usual suspects start making the protests go violent, and it just so happens this is happening as the Prime Minister, Abdul Mahdi, has done all sorts of things that piss off the Americans, including planning to buy S-400s from Russia, dealing massively with China, giving a nearly $300 million electricity deal to German rather than American corporations, refusing to abide by US sanctions on Iran, buying all his electricity from Iran, and rejecting the so-called deal of the century. This guy is obviously a relatively independent leader, and it looks like maybe somebody wants to take him down for that reason, as they've taken down just about every independent leader around the world that's pissed off the empire over the past 75 years.
Yep, it's a color revolution, it looks like. I mean, there and in Lebanon, they've got people with legitimate grievances who are weaponized and directed at a particular leader that they don't like. It's really sad that this is the playbook again and again and again, but it is the playbook and it's constantly used, especially in the Middle East. I mean, you had the Arab Spring, and now this is Arab Spring Part 2, where you see independent leaders replaced with Western puppets in the name of democracy, of course, because that's always the buzzword for this sort of thing.
But the underlying issue, and we'll get to that later in the show, is the neoliberal economic destruction of ordinary people all over the world. And in Iraq, that's been worse than most places, as the U.S. theft of Iraq's oil has been the biggest, not just the U.S. A lot of people have been, corrupt, organized crime elements have been stealing Iraq's oil, and that's the main factor in trashing its economy. Of course, having it bombed into oblivion over decades and genocided didn't help either. So how about the Syrian oil smuggling issue? We mentioned that earlier. Russian military satellites confirm that the U.S. is complicit in smuggling Syrian oil. That all used to be blamed on Daesh, but Daesh was just a small part of the larger organized oil theft from the region.
No, when you see those convoys of trucks going by, and it's like, you really think the U.S. couldn't bomb them if they wanted to? No, obviously they're complicit. I mean, this is just more proof on a giant pile of proof. That there's no illusion there.
And this gets no traction in the American mainstream media. So that's why, we put a lot of RT and Sputnik up here. Sometimes I get tired of all of the RT stories that our producer Alan sends me. But the fact is that this is a really important story, and you're not going to see this on the front page of the New York Times.
Indeed.
So let's move on to more stuff that the mainstream won't cover. The crimes of Zion category, that is Israel and its outrages. We could more than fill the entire show every week with the Israeli outrages of that week, but we don't want to be called anti-Semitic, so we just cover a few of the outrages. Well, here's one of them, and one of the worst of this week. This 14-year-old boy murdered on July 13th of 2018 was among 46 children killed by Israeli snipers during the Great March of Return protests. Of those 46 children killed, and there were hundreds of adults, only 13 have been investigated. This is one that was investigated, and the sniper who cold-bloodedly murdered this child is getting community service. That's Israeli-style justice for you.
Yep. Yeah. And like you said, that most of them aren't even investigated. I mean, this is a really disgusting situation, and tens of thousands have been injured, let alone the deaths. I mean, the deaths was more than 251 the last time I checked, and I'm sure it's higher now. But yeah, this is their sport. People go up and sit and have picnics on top of hills so they can watch the snipers shooting the Palestinians. It's really disgusting.
Yeah, and people who want a gruesome description of this from Chris Hedges, who I think was still working for the New York Times when he wrote this up, and then they wouldn't publish it. And so he published it as Gaza. It's called Gaza Diary. And he describes watching Israeli snipers luring Palestinian children within their gun sights and then shooting them for sport. And he said he'd never seen anything that bad in all of these horrific war zones he'd covered. Once again, that's called Gaza Diary by Chris Hedges. Just Google those terms. And the next Israeli outrage story, Microsoft is funding an Israeli firm using facial recognition and other Orwellian technologies to control and surveil the Palestinians. Microsoft seems to be in bed with the Israelis at least as bad as almost all these other tech companies, although Facebook is giving them a run for their money, I suppose.
Yeah, the thing is that Microsoft is pledging to defend democracy. It's democracy, the version of democracy that is perpetrated by the US government all around the world, has nothing in common with the actual dictionary definition of the word democracy, but it's a buzzword that they use to overpower popular uprisings and popular decision-making and things like that. It's Microsoft is taking over the US elections with this election guard software that is in collaboration with the Pentagon, of course, because, they're all about democracy, taking over people's ability to vote. So they're just going to, I guess, switch votes. I don't know exactly what the software does, but if Microsoft and the Pentagon are involved in safeguarding the elections, it's not going to be safeguarded. Same here. The fact that the mainstream media is surprised that Microsoft is funding an Israeli firm that conducts Orwellian surveillance on peaceful people, then they're just not paying attention.
Well, that's true. It says the Israeli snipers are shooting down the peaceful demonstrators. I guess you can do anything to those Palestinians, and the vast majority of whom, of course, are struggling peacefully to get their human right of equality under the law and right of return to their ancestral homeland. Well, how about the Facebook issue, okay, Microsoft is bad enough. They build Microsoft chips in Israel and they're all backdoored. But Facebook is trying hard to be even more ultra-Zionist than Microsoft. This week we learned that well, I guess we learned this before, but it was written up very well by Alison Weir, that Facebook has been massively purging Palestinian accounts, journalists, bloggers, activists. They all get purged. Huge censorship effort. Zuckerberg went over and met with Bibi Netanyahu and agreed to work with him in censoring the Palestinians. And here's the chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg, who is a big donor to Zionist causes, totally on board with them. So Facebook is right up there with Microsoft among the big tech companies that are part of the Zionist enterprise.
Yeah, I found this interesting because Facebook is supposedly suing NSO Group, the maker of that Israeli spyware Pegasus that's been spying on human rights activists and world leaders everywhere. So it's like you've got on one level, Facebook is supposedly suing this company. And then here you've got Sheryl Sandberg giving money to the ADL, which is basically, I mean, informationally, it's a terrorist group. It's not an actual, like, setting bombs and everything, but it's information terrorism. They go around defaming people. If you've ever said anything against Israel and you have any sort of public profile, you end up on their lists. So this is not a group that anybody should be contributing money to. I mean, I like what PewDiePie did a few months ago, the YouTube star, who I really have no idea why he's a YouTube star. I see nothing really appealing in his presentation or anything like that, but he did do a good thing in pretending to donate to the ADL and then retracting it. So that gets the kids to at least research what this organization is responsible for. But I mean, it was founded to defend a rapist and murderer. And so it's basically been going downhill since then, if that's possible, spying on American citizens, working with the FBI to try to convince them that everybody who says anything against Israel is a terrorist. She's basically supporting the worst of the American pro-Israel organizations.
And there's a lot of good background material on the ADL over at unz.com, unz.com. I think Ron himself wrote up a couple of those pieces. Well, moving over to the war on freedom in the U.S. category, it isn't just the Israelis that murder people that they don't like, that are killing Muslims who are struggling for their rights. The U.S. FBI does that sometimes too. On October 28th, 2009, FBI agents stormed this warehouse in Detroit. I think 20 FBI agents went in there with bombs going off, distraction bombs, and murdered Luqman Abdullah, an imam who has worked with H. Rap Brown, who's now known as Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin. And this looks like it was one of those Fred Hampton style targeted assassination raids. They didn't admit that their whole purpose of sending these 20 guys in was just to shoot him down, but that's what they did. They claim that he had a gun and he shot at the police dog that was chewing on him, but there's not a shred of evidence that he had a gun or fired it. The video shows him obeying the orders to go down on the floor, and then the FBI pumps 20 or 30 bullets into his body.
Yeah, this is pretty disgusting. I mean, they take a peaceful congregation, and if they weren't extremists before, which there's no indication that they were, it would be surprising if they didn't develop some sort of hatred of government or a hatred of cops after that, because the guy didn't do anything. And unfortunately, everybody else is left to pick up the pieces. But yeah, this is the pattern of the FBI. They infiltrate groups. I mean, this article talks about an informant that lured him into the warehouse. They infiltrate groups. They destroy groups. And when you see the left standing up for the FBI, it really makes you want to throw up, because this is what the FBI does to all leftist groups. They just completely fill them full of holes, fill them full of informants, and then turn them into self-sabotaging messes. So this is... Yeah.
I'm told that most of the on-the-ground FBI agents are actually decent and reasonably idealistic and committed to trying to do their jobs right. But regardless, in the political arena, and maybe other arenas as well, it doesn't seem to work out that way very often. And speaking of making people angry, as you said, this obviously would transform the survivors of that raid into people with a chip on their shoulder. Well, how about the Orwellian pre-crime efforts here? We have William Barr announcing that there's going to be a national disruption and early engagement program aimed at engaging and detecting potential mass shooters. They're going to detain people based on a pre-crime assessment that this person might become a mass shooter. and they're going to force counseling and electronic monitoring on them. And in the next story, the Republicans in Congress are pushing something similar to be used on students in our schools, using mass surveillance technology to monitor the students' online activity. Well, if you want to really piss people off and get them to pick up a gun, just keep on doing this kind of stuff. You know,
Yep,
I mean, I think that's what they want. I think the FBI their budget depends on having radical, violent rebels, and so they're pissing us off enough. They're going to make sure that they get those rebels.
Yep, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for sure. This kind of stuff will turn anybody, especially students who haven't really got fully formed political ideas yet, will turn them very much against the government. And then they'll have their, I mean, I'm not saying that it's even going to make students take up a gun or anything, but it's certainly going to make them speak out against this completely ridiculous, like, unconstitutional, disgusting surveillance. And it's, you know, the old joke is, oh well, 1984 is not it was warning, not an instruction manual. And so sure enough, Philip K. Dick's works of science fiction were a warning, not an instruction manual. This whole pre-crime thing is straight out of Minority Report, the film that was made based on the book. And it's pretty bad. Nobody's talking about this. And then the mainstream media don't want us to know about this at all. Mint Press has been one of the only institutions reporting on this. I guess this one about the school surveillance has actually pissed off enough parents that maybe they're forcing the mainstream media to cover it. But I would think the more surprising thing for people who don't have children is that very much of this surveillance is already in place at schools. All children's email activity, internet activity is monitored. I mean, there's that story from a couple of years ago about how a kid was eating candy and it turned out that his laptop was wired with remote surveillance. So they thought he was taking drugs, and they hauled him in for a disciplinary proceeding because he was eating candy in front of his computer. And that was years ago. So one can only imagine what they're doing now. All your devices are monitoring you. I would suggest anyone prepared to have a family should move out of the United States immediately.
And we are told that China is the technocratic gulag where there's ubiquitous surveillance and so on and so forth. Well, in China, that may be true. It may be even worse than here, but at least they take care of their ordinary people. They are on track to have completely eliminated poverty and homelessness by, I think, 2 years from now. So why are people rising up in revolt all over the world? Well, maybe more so than in China. Probably because the neoliberal economic model has destroyed their lives. And let's look at some of the places that are witnessing these protests that are often turning violent. In Beirut, Andrei Volchek wrote a great piece here. Andrei lives in Beirut. He says that the bad transportation, electricity shortages, contaminated and erratic water supply, garbage piling up in the streets, suffering from fourth world diseases, even though they're loaded with Land Rover SUVs and Maseratis and Porsche sports cars, Armani suits. That it's this grotesque economic disparity that drives protests that turn violent. And we're seeing it all over the world this week. I've said that maybe some of these protests, especially in Iraq, but maybe also in Lebanon, are partly driven by the empire, which doesn't like Abdul Mahdi in Iraq and doesn't like Hezbollah, which triumphed in the recent elections in May in Lebanon. But I think we have to admit that this neoliberal economic model, whether it's in Iraq or in Lebanon or here in South America, covered in the Pepe Escobar article, is the root cause of people being angry enough that whoever it is can get them out in the streets and get them acting violently.
Yep, it's really disgusting that they take legitimate rage, popular rage against a neoliberal system that has disenfranchised millions, disenfranchised probably billions, and co-opt those movements for their own gain. I mean, they'll overthrow like independent-leaning governments or governments that are trying to make a difference. Of course, in Argentina, they actually succeeded in overthrowing a bad one. Not overthrowing, but voting them out of office, a bad one. And in Chile, they've succeeded in making some waves. But in places like Hong Kong, they've taken what looks like popular anger against neoliberalism, where people in Hong Kong live in these tiny, tiny apartments where they can barely move, and turned it into something against China. So you have to watch these rebellions, that even the ones that start from a good cause, because they're almost universally co-opted by these evil forces and used to bring on even more enforcement, more neoliberalism, more really disturbing progress towards total police state control.
Absolutely right. Well, in this article, Pepe Escobar talks about the elections what was it, just 3 or 4 days ago in Argentina, where Alberto Fernandez, with Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner as his vice president, beat the neoliberal candidate Mauricio Macri. And according to Pepe, it took only 4 years for Macri's neoliberalism to totally trash Argentina. So next, he thinks maybe Lula will go from prison back into power in Brazil, sort of
That'd be
like
nice.
Mandela did in South Africa. That would be great. And we're going to move on to Chile in a moment. But first, let's go to the next slide on Russia and India setting up an alternative to the SWIFT payment system. This could be a threat to Western bankster-controlled neoliberalism, allowing the rebel countries to trade directly and bypass the petrodollar. This is a huge geostrategic issue.
Yeah, this is important because right now, I mean, I guess the couple of the EU countries had set up some like thing with Iran trying to, but they wouldn't allow them to sell oil on it, and it was really an inferior solution. This is much better because it's like the headline says, connecting 3 billion people, and it's really it allows them to actually trade everything. So that's good. It gets the U.S. out of the picture. The quicker the petrodollar collapses, the better for the world. I mean, it's going to suck for this country, but in the grand scheme of things, it works out better for everybody else, and it's better for later before they've got the whole country under their control. I mean, the whole world under their control, rather.
And so this is part of the global struggle against bankster-controlled neoliberalism. At the top, you have this working to retool the world's financial system. And then down at the grassroots level, you have these protests and sometimes election results. And in Chile, we just saw this week a huge protest that caused the government to cancel the climate summit and the APEC, not APEC, the APEC summit due to protests. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera was supposed to host Trump and Xi, but that's all gone now as Chile descends into chaos. Chile, of course, was the laboratory for this neoliberal model when they overthrew Allende on September 11th, 1973, and put in the gangster Pinochet to destroy the whole social system in Chile and unleash neoliberalism. Chile has been a big hotbed of political struggle ever since, and now it looks like the anti-neoliberal forces are on the ascendancy.
Yep. They had to happen sometime, and I'm glad it's happening sooner rather than later, because like I said, the sooner the system falls, the better it's going to be for everybody. I mean, yeah, there'll be some work to do to rebuild, but that's better than living under the boot forever.
Yeah, I thought this was a great quote from journalist Alina Duarte talking about this is happening all across Latin America. She writes, of course, the U.S. media is not reporting what's going on because this could be a really bad moment for this country to understand that the people are protesting because of the consequences of U.S. imperialism. In other words, this has a possibility of resonating within the U.S. No wonder the corporate media doesn't want to talk about it. And in the next slide, we come to a terrific story for RT written by none other than you, Helen Wyniski, about the young American turn towards socialism. This is distressing. The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation would sponsor a poll to see whether young Americans are turning towards the left. And indeed, they are. 70% of young Americans are ready to vote for a socialist candidate. So this is going up and up and up and up and up. So Ellen, maybe tell us the way, the point you made in this article, because I think this article points out the U.S. is still pretty much a place where we could see the kind of action that we're talking about breaking out in other countries.
Yeah, because they have socialism for everybody except the people. I mean, it's basically a mirror image, like Alice in Wonderland version of socialism, where big oil, big pharma, big agriculture, everybody, a big military, obviously, has socialism. They all get huge amounts of government funding to prop them up. And some of them, of course, big tech has got monopolies everywhere. And in other sectors, there are near monopolies. Military has got a couple of near monopolies. And it's socialism for everybody except the people. So the fact that the kids want socialism is not so unusual. They see that everybody gets it except for them. They see that they're struggling. They see that they can't make ends meet. They can't put a roof over their heads. Nobody can afford to buy houses anymore. It's only natural. So it either extends socialism to everybody or get rid of it for the corporations and have a free market, because that would at least allow people to throw out the parasites that have been leeching off the economy for decades.
Well, when I ran for Congress in 2008, I actually proposed kind of inverting the current situation. In other words, I was proposing that we should be regulating, taxing and regulating the big businesses, but essentially deregulating the little guys. And that way, the mom and pop businesses would have a competitive advantage. As it is, the economies of scale and other advantages for the big organizations allow them to totally monopolize whole sectors. And if we had socialism in the sense of serious regulation and busting them up using antitrust law to break up the big outfits, while deregulating the smaller businesses, we'd have the best of both worlds, and it would help erode these unfair advantages that the big guys have. Of course, that's a utopian, quixotic kind of proposal, but it still makes policy sense.
Indeed. Yep, that's how it should be. People should have more of the power. There's more of us, and the fact that we're sitting idly by and letting the corporations eat our lunch is really unfortunate.
But of course, it may not matter in the end because we're all going to be swamped by the rising sea levels. 300 million people will be displaced, driven out of their homes by 2050, according to this new information reported here on CBS News. Well, so much of what we get from the experts, so much of what we see in the mainstream is pure BS that I don't blame that segment of my audience that has extreme doubts about this climate change narrative. We're in an epistemological crisis here. Can we believe anything they tell us? And that means that even if it's true and that we really need to have these radical changes to stop carbon-driven climate change, nobody should have any confidence in the establishment narrative here. And so we might all, go extinct or have civilization destroyed because 9/11 and all of these other issues that we talk about on this show have created a situation where no awake, intelligent person would ever believe anything the authorities tell us. And that would be too bad, wouldn't it?
Yep. I mean, there's no reason why we should believe them. And it is unfortunate. They've cried wolf all these years. So why would anyone believe them about climate change? I mean, certainly Miami Beach is sliding into the ocean, and other parts of Long Island are underwater. Babylon, it's definitely a bind because there's indications that there is some truth to this, but why would you believe these people who have lied to you your entire life?
And this story is an example of the mainstream stories that are distorted on this issue. I've fought with a lot of my audience about this and shown that a lot of the anti-climate change material out there is riddled with inaccuracies and contradictions and logical fallacies and so on. But so is the mainstream stuff. I mean, in this article, they claim that Jakarta, Indonesia, is sinking, and that's somehow the fault of rising sea levels. Well, that's not the fault of rising sea levels. Jakarta is sinking because the ground is subsiding. So you put that kind of inaccurate stuff into the article, and you ruin your credibility. So anyway, and in the next slide, the U.S. Army thinks a climate apocalypse is coming, and it will give them great opportunities, as well as some problems. The opportunities include that the Arctic will melt so we can get in there with our military and the resources before the Russians get. But the problem is that there may be restrictions on how the military sees the climate change issue.
Yeah, they're going to use anything that happens as an indication of, we need more military everywhere. Anything happens, they stub their toe, they drop a glass and it breaks. We need more military to clean this up. It's their predictable response to anything. But I do find it interesting that they're finding ways to weaponize climate change because, I mean, there are theories that they're somehow involved in the perpetration of climate change. So it's logical to think that.
Yeah, and people who are interested in one alternative view of that should listen to my interview with Dane Wigington of geoengineeringwatch.com. Dane was on my radio show a while back. You can find the radio shows by going to truthjihad.com and click on the radio link. And listen to Dane. He has a very interesting take on it. He thinks that we are in a climate crisis and an ecological crisis, but he thinks that they're already spraying the atmosphere and doing other things to try to remediate it that are actually making the situation worse. And for all we know, that could be true because, again, the problem is this epistemological crisis. We can't believe anything the authorities tell us. We really need glasnost and perestroika first so we can get more accurate information, and then we can make decisions based on that information. And I think that the elite could trust the people with this kind of honest information. I don't see how the people could run things any worse than the elite if they were given honest information. But that's just me. Maybe I'm crazy. Anyway, speaking of the military moving towards war, how about Trump withdrawing from the Open Skies Treaty? This is just about the end of the Cold War treaties, the INF Treaty, the START Accord, and now Trump's going to withdraw, and the U.S. and Russia will no longer be able to send overflights, keeping an eye on what each other are doing. Another move towards war. It's bad news, and once again, this raises the issue of whether Trump really is such a peace president.
Yeah, it's definitely not a good sign. I mean, obviously, pulling out of the INF Treaty was one could excuse that by saying, oh, well, China wasn't a signatory, so like we just wanted to be equal with China. That's the excuse. I don't see an excuse for this one because, I mean, being able to see what each other is doing is kind of important. But I mean, he's not his own man anymore. So even if it was he wanted peace, nobody else wants peace, and he's surrounded himself with people who want more. So that's his fault.
So if he gets booed at the World Series, he has no one to blame but himself. Well, maybe, because the people booing him may not be booing him for all the best of reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this picture. It looks like he wants to clobber those people booing a baseball bat, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, is that the Democrats going after this impeachment for some totally ridiculous reason, when it's like you could impeach him for something real, but then you would have to examine previous presidents for doing the same thing and stuff. Nobody wants to do that.
Well, it's certainly entertaining. You know, this. Did you see the video of Trump at the World Series as they introduce him, and a big self-satisfied smile goes across his face, and then when he realizes he's being booed, the instant change of expression. It's quite a magical moment. This guy is. I mean, if he didn't exist, Hollywood or somebody would have to invent him. It's just such lowbrow, dumbed down, lowest common denominator mass entertainment. It's really quite a spectacle.
He's the president we deserve. He's the president we deserve. Exactly the president we deserve.
And speaking of a president we deserve, we'll finish with the most important story of the week. Trump has just retweeted. He retweets all kinds of interesting stuff. And here he retweets an account called President Trump's butt or something like that, because it's got a story that he thinks is on his side. So Trump, he has quite a trigger finger on that Twitter account, fast and loose and reckless style running his Twitter account. That's part of the reason that he's so entertaining, whatever you may think about him.
Yeah, it's the fact that no
I guess
media
that's a place to end it on Donald Trump's. What else can you say about that?
Sorry, no media would be covering that if it wasn't Trump doing it, though. So it's like, why has the media sunk to the level of covering who Donald Trump retweets? That's a little weird. But yeah, I mean, he's Twitter happy, which, I mean, it's better than the president sitting in silence and not telling us what's going on in his mind. So I don't get why people think that he should be taken off Twitter. No, it's good. We want openness here.
Yeah, not only for the entertainment value, but every now and then he tweets something really great. Just a few weeks ago, when he was pulling out of Syria, supposedly, he was tweeting wonderful stuff about wanting to get out of these endless wars that have killed all these people. Fantastic stuff. So yeah, I mean, his Twitter account is a double-edged sword, just like the whole Trump presidency. And I guess we're gonna have to end it there because we hit the end of the hour. So thank you, Helen Biniski. That was fun. And thank you to our supporters. And we do hope to be back, God willing, next week, broadcasting live as we think we are right now. It's your support that helps us keep doing that. So please keep that up. And God willing, we'll see you all next time.
Bye-bye.